If that dog wakes me up one more time, I'm calling animal control. That was the first thing I shouted as I groggily shoved my comforter off and sat up, the sun barely crawling into the bedroom window. Another morning, another round of distant howling that pierced the stillness of dawn. It wasn't a short burst either. It went on, drawn out and mournful, like the poor creature had lost something. Or someone. I'd tried earplugs. I even bought one of those noise machines that promised to whisk me off to dreamland with ocean waves and forest birds. But nothing worked. Every morning for 2 weeks now, at precisely 5:43 a.m., the howling would begin. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my feet, and the smell of last night's forgotten coffee grounds lingered in the kitchen. I lived alone, and it had been that way for the past year. After Mom passed and I left my job in Raleigh, this quiet 2-bedroom house in upstate New York was supposed to be a peaceful place to reset. The kind of town where everyone knows your name, the grocery clerks ask how your garden is doing, and neighbors wave at you from their porches. And it was. Except for that dog. I leaned against the windowsill and looked out toward the woods at the back of my property. That's where the sound came from. Past the tree line, across the creek that curved like a sleeping serpent behind the fence, hidden in the brush and thickets. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him plain as day. That mournful, aching sound, like something ancient calling from the dark. It didn't make sense. Nobody in our stretch of homes owned a dog that big. I'd asked the neighbors. Miss Elder, who baked pies even in 90-degree heat, told me she'd heard it too but figured it was a coyote. Mr. Lee next door said it might be a stray from town, though none of us had actually seen it. After a lukewarm shower and a dry piece of toast, I pulled on my jacket and stepped outside. The autumn wind had begun to settle in, rustling the yellowed leaves on the oaks and maples. The morning air was sharp and carried the earthy scent of damp soil. My boots crunched along the gravel path that led to the back fence. I hesitated a moment, hand on the worn wood, then climbed over. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe a giant black hound with a piercing stare and a secret? Maybe a lost pet in need of saving? Or maybe just answers? The ground sloped slightly as I walked, following the sound that had since faded. He never howled for long, just enough to wake me, to stir something in my chest, then silence. I passed the creek, hopping across a set of rocks like I used to as a kid. The woods beyond were thick, but not impossible to move through. Broken branches, mossy logs, and fallen leaves crunched beneath my feet. Birds stirred in the canopy above, and somewhere to my right, a squirrel darted through the underbrush. Then I saw it. Not the dog, but a patch of ground disturbed, as if something had dug there. The soil was darker, fresher. A few bits of fur lay tangled in the brush nearby. Gray, short, thick, too coarse for a deer. My pulse quickened. I knelt down and picked one up, turning it between my fingers, still warm from the morning sun. I heard a rustle behind me. I turned quickly, heart thudding. But nothing, just the wind. "Hey there?" I called, feeling half ridiculous. "Hello, you out here?" Silence. I stood up and brushed my hands on my jeans, suddenly feeling foolish. This wasn't some storybook quest. It was a noisy dog. Maybe he was a stray. Maybe he howled and then moved on. Still, something inside me whispered that this wasn't random. It wasn't just noise. That sound had purpose. I returned to my house with no more clues than I'd left with. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the fur, the dig marks, the sound. I ended up at my computer, doing the thing I should have done days ago. I posted in the local neighborhood group. Anyone else been hearing a dog howling near the woods every morning around 5:45? Trying to figure out if it belongs to someone or if it's a stray. I hit post and stared at the screen. Within minutes, the responses trickled in. Yes, we hear it too. Thought it was a coyote. My kids wake up crying from the noise. Poor thing sounds so sad. Haven't seen him, but my husband said he spotted a dog near the old Miller cabin last week. Miller cabin. I knew that place. It was deeper in the woods, past the creek, toward the hill with the moss-covered stones. Old man Miller had died 6 years ago, and the cabin had been abandoned since. Kids whispered it was haunted, but everyone just left it alone. What would a dog be doing there? The next morning, the howling came again, right on schedule. This time, I didn't curse or pull the covers over my head. I got dressed. My boots crunched on the cold ground as I passed the fence and crossed the creek. The sun was just beginning to paint the trees in gold. A chill snuck beneath my jacket, but I pressed on. I followed the sound. This time, I let it lead me. It was further than I expected. My legs burned as I climbed the slight hill, my breath visible in short puffs. And then, beyond a thicket of birch trees, I saw it. The cabin. The roof was half collapsed, and vines clung to the broken windows. The door hung ajar, swaying gently. But what caught my attention was the figure sitting just outside it. A dog. Large, gray, with deep brown eyes that watched me. He didn't growl or bark. He just sat there, as if waiting. I stopped in my tracks, unsure what to do. Slowly, I crouched and held out a hand. "Hey there, buddy. You've been waking me up every day, huh?" He tilted his head slightly, but didn't move. I crept closer, step by step, careful not to startle him. When I got within a few feet, I noticed something tied around his neck. A faded red collar, dirty but intact. No tag. He stood and backed into the cabin. Not quickly, not out of fear, more like an invitation. "You want me to follow you?" I asked quietly. He disappeared into the shadows. Against every better instinct, I stepped inside. The interior was dusty and cold. Old furniture covered in sheets, broken picture frames, a rusted stove. But then, in the far corner, something new. A pile of blankets, a food bowl, a torn backpack. Someone had been here. The dog circled the pile once, then lay down beside it, resting his head on his paws. I knelt and reached out. He let me touch him. His fur was coarse but clean. Someone had been caring for him, even if barely. I picked up the backpack. Inside, a journal. The name on the inside cover read, Abby Miller. Miller, the old man's granddaughter. I remembered her. She used to visit during summers. Red hair, always wearing overalls. I hadn't seen her in years. I opened the journal. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago. Still no luck finding work. Max keeps me company. Not sure how long we can stay here. If anyone finds this, please take care of him. He's the best thing I have left. I closed the journal, heart pounding. The dog, Max, whined softly beside me. That howl every morning wasn't just noise. It was mourning. She was gone. But not far. Maybe not for long. I had to find her. But I didn't even know where to start. Max looked up at me, and for the first time, His eyes softened. We sat there for a long time, the morning light creeping through the shattered windows. Two strangers, now tethered by someone missing. I didn't go home right away. I stayed. And for the first time in a year, I didn't feel quite so alone. I came back the next day with a bag of dog food, a blanket, and an old thermos of chicken broth I had lying around. I hadn't used it since my mom passed, but something about bringing comfort to someone else made me dig it out of the cabinet and clean it up. Max was already there when I arrived. Same spot, same stillness. When he saw me coming through the trees, he didn't bark. He just watched, like he had been waiting again. He let me come close, closer this time. When I knelt to pour the food into a chipped ceramic bowl I found in the cabin, he came right over, no hesitation. His tail wagged just a little. It was the first time I saw any movement from him that didn't feel heavy with sorrow. I sat down on a stump outside the cabin and sipped some of the broth, letting the rest cool in a bowl beside his food. He lapped it up slowly. No panic, no desperation. He wasn't starving, just alone. I didn't know why I kept coming back. Maybe it was the silence at home. Or maybe it was how Max didn't ask anything from me but still made me feel like I was doing something right. That night, I stayed long after the sun had slipped behind the trees. The wind picked up, rustling the brittle leaves. I wrapped my coat tighter and leaned against the cabin wall while Max rested by the door. I didn't have any leads on Abby. The journal didn't mention a phone number or address. No last known job or city. Just a few sad, quiet entries about her dog and the nights she couldn't sleep. Still, I felt a pull. I had to find her. The next morning, I walked into the small post office in town. It was a squat red brick building with faded blue paint on the door and a bulletin board full of lost cat flyers and announcements for pancake breakfasts. Sue, the postmaster, looked up from her crossword puzzle as I stepped in. "Morning," I said, clearing my throat. "Quick question. Do you remember Abby Miller?" Sue adjusted her glasses and frowned. "Red-headed girl? Used to come visit old Frank during summers?" "That's the one. Any idea where she went? Or if she still gets mail here?" Sue tapped her pen on the counter. "Haven't seen her in years, but..." I waited, heart thumping. A couple months back, we had a letter addressed to her show up. No return address, handwritten. I remember because it was smudged like someone cried while writing it. We don't forward mail unless folks leave instructions, so it just went into the bin. Might still be back there. "Can I see it?" Sue hesitated. "I probably shouldn't. But if it helps her, I suppose one little look can't hurt." She disappeared into the back and returned a moment later with a stack of forgotten mail. After flipping through it, she handed me a crumpled envelope. "Here." Didn't have the heart to toss it. The envelope was addressed simply, Abby Miller, C.O. Miller Cabin, Upstate NY. Inside was a note, only a few lines. "Abby, I know I messed up. I miss you. If you ever need a place to stay, you can always come back to Albany. I kept your room the same. Love, Dad." I turned it over. No number, no street, just the city. It wasn't much, but it was more than I had. I thanked Sue, tucked the note in my jacket, and walked out into the cold. Back at the cabin, I sat on the porch with Max curled up beside me. I read the note aloud. When I said Dad, his ears perked. "So she has family. Or did," I murmured. Max looked up at me, his eyes steady. What do you think, boy? Albany's a start? He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. I didn't have much to go on, but the next day I drove into Albany. The city buzzed with movement, so unlike our quiet town. I hadn't been in months. I parked near a small coffee shop and pulled out the only other lead I had, an old school yearbook I found in the town library's archives. Abby's name was listed under the class of 2010. There was a picture, too. Freckles. Wide eyes. That wild red hair. I stopped by a public records office and then the local library. It was slow going. Most people looked at me like I was crazy. One librarian, though, remembered the Millers. She said she thought Abby's father might live in a small neighborhood near the old train yard. It took hours of knocking on doors, but eventually I found him. His name was Mark Miller. He was tall, shoulders stooped like he carried too much. His face looked older than I remembered from town gatherings years ago. When I mentioned Abby, his expression softened into something like hope and fear mixed together. She was here, he said slowly. About 2 months back. Stayed a couple nights. Said she just needed to rest. She didn't say much else, then she left. Do you know where she went? He shook his head. Said she might try to find work closer to the mountains, somewhere small. Said she wanted to be where nobody knew her. I asked if he had any way to contact her. He didn't. She hadn't left a number. But she took Max, he said quietly. That dog, he's been with her through everything. When she came home crying, it was Max who never left her side. When she said goodbye, she held him like he was the last good thing in her world. He's back at the cabin now, I said. Mark blinked. She left him? He stayed behind, and he's been howling every morning since, like he's calling for her. Mark rubbed his face. She must have thought she was coming back. Abby wouldn't abandon him. Neither of us said the word that hung between us. I returned home late that night, Max still waiting by the cabin. I sat with him, this time wrapped in a blanket I brought. I watched the stars until the cold bit my fingers, and I had to go. The next few days, I made it my mission. I visited gas stations, diners, tiny grocery stores in small mountain towns, asking about a red-haired girl with a gray dog. Some said maybe. Some shrugged. But one, a woman at a roadside thrift store, paused. She came through here, bought a sweater, asked about job openings, didn't say much else. Do you know where she went? She was asking about shelters, places that might need volunteers. I scoured local shelters after that, and in 1-2 towns over I found a name in the volunteer log. Abby Miller, signed in, dated 3 weeks back. No contact info, but it was something. They said she showed up to help with intake and feeding. Said she left one day and didn't come back. No explanation. When I returned to the cabin, Max greeted me with a whimper. I scratched behind his ears. We're close, boy. I can feel it. He pressed his head against my knee, then backed into the cabin. I followed him. Something new had been placed in the backpack. A photo. Probably blown by wind from where I hadn't seen it before. Abby and Max, sitting on a hill. Her smile bright, his tongue lolling. It looked recent. On the back, a note. He kept me going, even when I didn't want to. I sat down, holding the photo. She was trying. Whatever she'd gone through, whatever darkness she'd faced, Max had been her light. And now he was waiting, mourning. But he wasn't giving up. He came back here, to the last place they were together. He howled for her every morning. And maybe, just maybe, someone would hear. The next morning, I joined him. I walked to the hill behind the cabin, where the trees thinned and the sunrise painted everything in gold. Max sat at my side. He howled, and I listened. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I wasn't leaving him alone. The mornings began to feel different after that. The air still held its sharpness, and the woods remained still and somber. But the silence between Max's howls and my quiet listening started to fill with something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. I was no longer just reacting to the sound that pulled me from sleep each day. I was listening, really listening, and trying to answer back in my own way. By looking, walking, asking questions that no one else had thought to ask. On the 5th morning of our new routine, Max didn't howl. I had stepped outside, bundled in 2 layers and cradling a travel mug of weak coffee, expecting to hear that familiar cry ripple through the trees. But it never came. The woods were still. Max wasn't at the cabin when I reached it. I called for him, voice breaking the silence with a nervous edge I hadn't expected. I checked the woods behind the hill, the creek, even doubled back to the place where I'd found that disturbed earth days earlier. Nothing. I stood there in the brittle hush, heart tightening. For some reason, that silence felt heavier than all the howling combined. I took a long breath and started to walk again. If Max had left, he wouldn't have gone far. He always came back. That was his pattern. About half an hour later, I spotted him near the edge of the woods, down by the county road that curved like a ribbon through the trees. He was sitting upright, body still, watching the horizon. His tail didn't move and he didn't turn until I got close. "Hey, there you are," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You had me worried." Max blinked slowly, then looked back toward the road. His ears twitched. "What is it?" That's when I heard it too. Not barking, not a cry, but an engine. A sputtering, labored one coming up the road. A truck, by the sound of it. Max stood and took a few steps forward. I stayed beside him. The truck rounded the bend. An old Ford, painted blue with patches of gray primer and rust spots like freckles on its side. It passed us and slowed to a stop about 30 feet ahead. The engine cut. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wore a flannel shirt, jeans too big for her frame, and boots that had seen better years. Her red hair was tied back, strands falling loose around her face. Even from a distance, I could see the weariness in her shoulders. "Abby?" I called out. She froze. Her head turned slowly, and when she saw Max, her face crumpled. Tears sprung to her eyes, and she dropped to her knees. Max ran. He didn't bark or hesitate. He ran to her with a speed I hadn't seen in him before, paws thundering against the gravel, tail wagging wildly. He reached her and practically knocked her over, burying his face into her chest as she wrapped her arms around him. I stayed where I was, giving them space. She whispered something I couldn't hear, holding on to him like she never planned to let go. After a few minutes, she looked up at me. Her face was streaked with tears. "You found him." "He found me first. Then he wouldn't let me go." She stood slowly, brushing off her knees. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. "I didn't mean to leave him. I needed to clear my head. I was supposed to come back, but the days got away from me. Then the car broke down for a while and I didn't think anyone would be out there. I thought maybe it was better this way. He howled for you every morning, never missed a day." Her hands trembled. Max leaned against her leg. "I didn't deserve that. He doesn't care about that. He only knew you were gone." We stood there for a moment, none of us moving. The wind picked up again. Abby finally glanced toward the cabin down the hill. "I left a lot back there. Things I didn't know how to face. They're still there. Your journal, that photo of you and Max, the blankets. It's all how you left it. I can't believe you even went looking. Most people wouldn't bother. Most people don't listen. But that howl? It wasn't just noise. It meant something." She ran a hand through her hair, wiping her face. "I should get him back home. If he'll even come." Max didn't move from her side. He never wanted to leave, just waited, every day. I walked them both back to the cabin. Abby moved slowly, like every step brought back memories. She stepped onto the porch and paused. "Haven't been back here since right after Grandpa passed. I thought maybe the quiet would help, and it did at first. But then everything came back." We stepped inside. She looked around and touched the edges of old furniture, the dusty mantle, the broken frame above the hearth. Max nosed his way around, checking everything like it had all changed without him. "It still smells like him," Abby whispered. "Pipe tobacco and motor oil. Sue at the post office had a letter for you, from your dad. That's how I found him. He told me you had been in Albany. He tried. I just wasn't ready to forgive yet. But maybe now, maybe I could try." We sat for a while on the porch, watching the wind tug at the trees. I poured us some coffee from my thermos, and she wrapped her fingers around the cup like it was the first warmth she'd felt in days. "How long have you been helping him?" she asked. "Almost 3 weeks. He never let me touch him at first. Just sat there, watched. But he always came back. And I kept coming, hoping I'd find a clue." "You found me." Max was asleep now, stretched between us like a guard. Abby reached into her coat and pulled out a folded flyer. "I was headed to a shelter 2 towns over today. Figured maybe they'd let me help in exchange for food or something. That's when I thought to drive through here, just for old time's sake. Then I saw him on the road. That wasn't luck." She looked at me. "No, it wasn't." Later that day, I walked back home, leaving them with some supplies and a promise to return. That evening, there was no howling, just the creak of wind through trees. The next morning, I came back with groceries and a bag of dog treats. Abby had cleaned up the cabin a bit, airing out old blankets and sweeping the porch. She had a light in her face that hadn't been there the day before. "He slept the whole night," she said. "Didn't even stir. I think he knows I'm really here now. He knew before you did." We laughed softly. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Max wandered out and pressed against my legs in greeting. I handed him a treat, and he took it gently. "What will you do now?" I asked Abby. She looked toward the woods. "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should try Albany again. See if my dad and I can patch things up. But part of me wants to stay. Fix up this place. Make it more than just a memory." "You wouldn't be alone." She nodded. "Not anymore." For the next few days, we fell into a rhythm. I came by in the mornings, helped clear out the cabin, brought supplies. She cooked simple meals on the old propane stove and hung clothes on the line like she was building something again. Max followed her everywhere. One afternoon, as we repaired a broken step on the porch, she turned to me. "You know, before all this, I never really believed in signs or fate. But I can't stop thinking about how Max waited for me, how he howled every morning until I came back, how you listened. Sometimes the world doesn't scream, it just whispers, and you have to be quiet enough to hear it." She smiled. "I'm glad you were." We didn't talk about the hard things directly. Not yet. Not the nights she must have spent crying, or why she really left Albany, or what Max saw in those weeks without her. But we talked about little things, recipes, her grandpa's old stories, the way the stars looked from the cabin roof, and that was enough for now. Max didn't howl anymore. He didn't need to. She was home. The wind had shifted again. A softer breeze coming from the west swept the last of the brittle leaves from the trees surrounding the Miller cabin. The air felt cleaner, fresher somehow, as though even the woods had begun to breathe easier. It had been nearly a week since Abby returned, and each day brought with it some small change, a subtle transformation. The roof still sagged, and the porch still groaned beneath our boots, but it no longer looked abandoned. It looked lived in. Max no longer waited by the door in silence. Now, when I made my way through the trees each morning, I could hear the muffled sound of his paws padding across the floorboards and the faint jingling of the new collar Abby had bought him. He met me halfway down the path now, tail wagging in wide arcs, nose twitching as he sniffed the air to make sure it was me. Abby had taken to waking early again, though not because of the howling. She said it felt good to rise with the sun, said it helped her feel like time was hers again. One morning, I found her kneeling in the dirt behind the cabin, a small spade in her hand, marking out where she planned to grow tomatoes and herbs come spring. "Doesn't look like much now," she said, brushing soil from her palms. "But you just wait. Come May, this whole patch is going to smell like basil and rain." I handed her a thermos of warm cider. "I'll believe it when I see it." "You'll see it," she said with a smile. "You better." We spent those early hours fixing what could be fixed. The broken window on the east side got replaced with an old pane from the shed. We patched up the holes in the roof with tar paper and shingles scrounged from the county salvage yard. The door no longer creaked when it opened, and the kitchen faucet no longer sputtered air before water. One afternoon, we pulled out the moth-eaten cushions from the old love seat and replaced them with thick wool blankets and pillows Abby had collected from her brief travels. Max immediately claimed the spot by the fireplace, curling into a warm heap of fur and sighing as though he'd finally settled. There were quiet moments too, times when we sat on the back steps with chipped mugs of tea, saying nothing, just watching the woods sway and stretch. Abby often looked toward the horizon, eyes narrowing like she was reading some invisible sign across the treetops. "I used to think if I got far enough away from everything, I could forget," she said one afternoon, her voice low. "But it turns out memories travel faster than cars. They get there first. Maybe forgetting isn't the answer. Maybe remembering differently is." She nodded. "I'm trying. Some days are easier than others." Max, sensing the shift in tone, nudged his nose against her elbow until she scratched behind his ears. Later that evening, I returned with a stack of old books I'd borrowed from the town library, ones I thought might help her plan out the garden. Abby took them with a grin, flipping through the pages like they were treasure maps. We sat by the fire, the cabin aglow with a golden flicker that made everything feel softer. As the logs crackled and settled, Abby pulled a tin from the shelf. Inside were letters, all unopened. "I wrote these but never sent them," she said. "To my dad. To myself. Some of them to Max, if you can believe that." "Why didn't you send them?" "I was afraid. That saying it out loud made it all real. And if it was real, then I had to deal with it." I didn't press. Instead, I asked, "Do you want to read one?" She looked at the stack for a long time, then chose a folded one with frayed edges. She opened it, smoothed it out on her lap, and began to read. Her voice wavered at first, but grew steadier as she went on. It was a letter about a day when Max had stood guard at the motel door after someone knocked too loudly, about how that little moment had made her feel safe when nothing else did. By the time she finished, Max was asleep at her feet. She tucked the letter back into the tin. "I think it's time I started sending them," she said. The next morning, I brought her into town. She wore her old boots and a flannel jacket with patches sewn in by hand. Her hair was down, and though her eyes still held shadows, there was a calmness to her steps. We stopped by the post office, and Sue blinked in surprise when Abby stepped inside. "Well, I'll be," Sue said. "Thought I was seeing a ghost." "Just someone who got a little lost," Abby replied with a soft smile. She bought stamps, dropped 3 letters into the slot, and turned to me. "You hungry?" We walked to the diner, the one with the squeaky screen door and the laminated menus that hadn't changed in 15 years. The waitress remembered Abby, brought us extra toast without being asked. Max waited outside the window, tied to a post with a new leash, watching every movement inside. We laughed over coffee and eggs, shared stories about town folks we barely remembered. Abby pointed to a photo on the wall, a faded black and white of her grandfather standing in front of the cabin, with a much younger Max sitting beside him. "He loved that dog," she said. "Said Max had a better sense of people than most humans ever would." He was right. After breakfast, we walked the town square. Abby stopped at the feed store, the hardware shop, even peeked into the small art gallery that had sprung up since she'd been gone. Everywhere we went, people greeted her with cautious warmth, like they wanted to ask where she'd been but knew better than to press. That evening, back at the cabin, she found an old Polaroid camera in the attic. It still worked. We took photos of the cabin, of Max in his spot by the fire, of the garden plot she'd started marking with string. She pinned them to the wall beside the fireplace. "If I'm going to stay," she said, "I want this place to feel like it remembers me too." We shared a dinner of stew and cornbread, the scent of rosemary and garlic clinging to the walls. The night settled quietly, and as the fire dimmed, we listened to the soft breathing of Max curled up in his usual place. It had become a rhythm, not a perfect one, but steady. A few days later, Abby asked me to drive her to Albany. "I need to see my dad," she said. "Really see him this time, not just pass through." We took the drive in my truck, Max riding in the back seat with his nose against the window. The city buzzed with its usual energy, and Abby grew quiet as we approached her father's street. Mark Miller was standing on the porch when we pulled in. He didn't wave, just waited. When Abby stepped out, Max jumped down beside her. "Hi, Dad," she said. He nodded. "Been a long time." "Too long." He stepped forward and opened his arms. She didn't hesitate. They held each other for a while, Max circling their feet. I gave them space, sitting on the tailgate, watching the leaves fall across the sidewalk. That evening, as we drove back, Abby leaned her head against the window. "It wasn't perfect," she said, "but it was real. That was enough." Max barked once from the back seat, soft and low. We both laughed. Back at the cabin, we found a package waiting on the porch. A neighbor had dropped off fresh eggs and a note that read, "Welcome back, Abby." She read it twice and then pinned it beside the Polaroids. That night, we sat by the fire, Max snoring gently between us. The wind moved through the trees in soft waves. Abby leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. "I think I'm starting to remember what it feels like to belong again." Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. The cabin spoke for us. The quiet did. And Max, resting peacefully, was finally silent, not because he had given up, but because everything he had howled for had come home. The snow came early that year. Not heavy, but a quiet dusting that settled over the trees like powdered sugar. The first flakes fell overnight, and when I arrived at the cabin the next morning, the world looked softer, like someone had pulled a thin white blanket over everything. Max was already outside, his paws crunching in the new layer, nose buried in the air like he could smell the change. Abby was on the porch, bundled in a worn wool coat and a red knit hat pulled low over her ears. She held 2 mugs of something steaming and handed one to me as I climbed the steps. "Apple cinnamon," she said. "Found a box of the mix behind Grandpa's old tins. Probably expired, but it tastes fine. If it warms my hands, it passes the test." We stood there for a while, watching Max gallop clumsily through the shallows of snow, pausing now and then to sniff under logs or dig at a patch of buried earth. His tail never stopped moving. "He always loved the snow," Abby said. "Grandpa used to say it made him act like a puppy again." "He looks younger," I said. "He feels younger. So do I." Inside, the cabin smelled like pine wood and cinnamon. The hearth had been cleaned out and rebuilt with fresh logs. Abby had arranged a few evergreen sprigs across the mantel, held in place by smooth river stones from the creek. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It felt full of motion, even in stillness, the kind of quiet that comes with belonging. Later that day, we visited a nearby farm market that ran through winter. Abby wanted to get beeswax candles and see if they still carried jars of local honey. The market was mostly empty, except for a few bundled folks shopping for potatoes and root vegetables. Max trotted beside us, tail wagging like he owned the place. The vendor remembered Abby. Her name came out like a slow memory, tested on the tongue, followed by a warm smile. "You came with Frank back in the day. Used to help him pick out pears." "That was a long time ago." "Doesn't feel like it. Still got the same wind out here. Still got the same winter." We walked back to the truck, carrying a paper bag of candles and 2 jars of orange blossom honey. Max had a new chew toy clamped between his teeth, a gift from the woman at the stand who said she remembered his ears. That night, we lit the candles in glass jars and watched them flicker in the reflection of the windows. Abby sat cross-legged on the rug, journal open in her lap. She didn't write. Not right away. Just stared at the page like it might blink first. "Some days, I still feel like I don't deserve this," she said. "Everyone feels that way sometimes." But he never left. He waited. I don't know if I could have done the same. But you came back. That matters. I want to give him a better life. Not just keep surviving. He deserves more than that. Max stretched out his front paws and rolled onto his side, tail thumping once before going still. "He already has more," I said. "He has you." We stayed up late that night, watching the snow thicken outside. When I left, she walked me to the path. Max followed, stopping just at the line where the woods began, as if seeing me off was part of his job now. The next morning, I found Abby halfway through clearing a path around the cabin. She used an old snow shovel with a wobbly handle, and Max chased every tossed pile like it might be hiding treasure. "Didn't expect you to start landscaping," I said, grinning. "Not landscaping," she replied. "Just making sure he can still do his morning zoomies." We laughed, then spent the rest of the morning stacking firewood by the door and checking the roof for leaks. Every so often, Max would dart into the woods and come back with a branch or a stick too big to carry. He'd drop it at our feet like a gift. "He thinks he's helping," Abby said. "He is, in his own way." That afternoon, she asked if I wanted to hike the ridge trail with her. We hadn't been up there since summer. The trail was quiet and a bit slippery, but manageable. The air was crisp and clear, and our breath came out in puffs. At the top, we stood overlooking the valley, the roofs of the town in the far distance, and the river weaving like a silver ribbon beyond the tree line. "I used to come here with Grandpa," Abby said. "He'd bring coffee in a thermos and just sit. He said when the wind hit just right, you could hear the river talking." "What did it say?" "Nothing you could repeat. It was different every time." That was the point. We sat on a log, Max at our feet, and listened. The wind did move through the trees differently up there. Not louder, just deeper. As we hiked down, she paused beside a cluster of birch trees. "I think I want to stay," she said. "Not just for the season. I mean really stay. Fix up the cabin, maybe find work in town. Get back to living." "You mean it?" She nodded. "I do." In the days that followed, she made calls. She reached out to a local clinic about volunteer work. She filled out forms at the library for part-time jobs. She even asked Sue at the post office about getting mail delivered again. "Feels strange," she said. "Like I'm stepping back into a life I walked away from. Or building one you never had time for before." The snow deepened that week, and we had to dig paths daily. The cabin stayed warm. The fire never left to fade. Abby started keeping a schedule, small things. Write in the morning, read at lunch, walk Max before dusk. I brought over a crock pot, and we tried recipes clipped from old newspapers. One morning, as we sipped tea and watched snowflakes swirl past the window, Abby looked at me and said, "You know, I thought I came here to disappear, but now I think I came here to begin again." Max snored softly beneath the table, paws twitching in some dream only he understood. We spent a Saturday fixing up the shed. Abby wanted to use it as a workshop. We cleared out broken tools, swept dust, patched holes in the roof. She found an old wooden stool and cleaned it until the grain shone through. "This is going to be my space," she said, standing in the doorway. "To make things. To think. You already made this. All of this." She looked at Max. "No, he did. I just followed his howl." Another week passed. The days grew shorter, the air colder, but something about winter no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a beginning in disguise. The clouds hung low that morning, the sky a dull pewter, like a lid pressed over the valley. The cold had deepened overnight, freezing the top layer of snow into a fine crust that crackled under our boots. I arrived at the cabin with a paper sack under one arm and a thermos of hot chocolate tucked beneath the other. Max greeted me at the path as usual, tongue lolling, breath fogging around his muzzle. But he didn't dash back to the porch this time. Instead, He turned and trotted toward the creek. "Where you going, buddy?" I asked, following him. Abby stepped out of the cabin just as I reached the bottom of the slope. "He's been doing that all morning," she called, "running back and forth like he's got something to show us." We met near the edge of the frozen creek, where Max stood beside an old stump that had fallen during a storm years ago. The bark was gone, and moss clung to its shadowed side. Max pawed at the snow, revealing a glint of something buried. I crouched beside him and brushed it clear. A rusted metal tin, its lid barely holding. Abby knelt beside me, her breath catching as she saw the familiar dents on the top. "That was Grandpa's," she whispered. "He used to keep old photos in it. Said one day, when I was older, he'd show me everything. But he never got the chance." We pried it open carefully. Inside were a bundle of photographs, all black and white, some curling at the edges. There were pictures of the cabin in its early days, before the trees grew up around it. One showed Abby as a toddler, perched on her grandpa's knee, her hair a wild halo. Another captured a younger version of Frank Miller, smiling beside a woman in a gingham dress with her hands on her hips. Abby stared at it. "That's my grandma," she said. "I never met her. She passed before I was born." At the bottom of the tin was a folded sheet of paper. It was yellowed and delicate, with a shaky script. Abby unfolded it and read aloud. "To the one who finds this, I hope you understand why I left it buried. Some things are meant to rest, but not to be forgotten. The land changes, the trees grow taller, but the memories stay beneath the bark. If Abby finds this one day, I want her to know she was always the best part of my life." She gave it color again. She stopped, swallowing hard. "He never said stuff like this out loud," she said. "Not even close." We sat by the creek, flipping through the photos. Max lay between us, occasionally nudging our hands like he wanted to be included. "I wonder what made him bury it," I said. "Maybe he knew I wasn't ready before," Abby replied. "Maybe he hoped I'd come back when I was." The next few days were quieter, not in a sad way. More like everything had shifted slightly, settled deeper. Abby spent the afternoons sorting through the tin, laying out the photos in rows on the kitchen table. Some she tacked to the wall, others she pressed into an old scrapbook. One evening, as the wind howled outside and snow brushed against the windows, she turned to me and said, "I think I want to write about him. Not just for me, but for others. Maybe even a book." "You should." "You think anyone would read it?" "I would. And I think a lot of people would want to know how a man who buried memories still managed to love that deeply." She smiled. "I guess it'll be about Max, too. He's part of everything now." We toasted with mugs of cider, the candlelight flickering between us. The cabin grew more homey with every passing day. Abby painted the window trim a soft pine green. She hung dried herbs over the sink and repurposed a cracked basin into a planter. The shed became a real workshop, cluttered but warm, with shelves of tools and baskets of half-finished crafts. Max took to napping there in the afternoons, stretched out on an old bath mat she lined with fleece. One morning, Abby asked if I wanted to come into town with her again. She had a meeting with the owner of the general store, who was looking for someone to help with inventory and displays. We rode in together, Max sitting proudly in the back seat like he belonged to both of us. At the store, I waited while she talked to the owner, flipping through a rack of handmade scarves near the window. After a while, she stepped out, eyes wide. "I start Monday," she said. "Just mornings for now, but it's something." That's great. It feels strange, like stepping into a version of me I thought I left behind. Not behind, just waiting. On the way home, we stopped by the diner. The waitress greeted us with pie samples and stories about her new kitten. Max dozed under the table. Abby looked out the window, her face calm. "It's weird," she said, "how fast things change. A month ago, I didn't know where I was going. Now I'm making plans. Not big ones. Just regular. Those are the best kind." We drove back through winding roads, the trees bare and glistening with frost. The cabin came into view like a painting, smoke rising from the chimney, the light in the window waiting. That night, we listened to the radio for the first time in weeks. Abby found a station that played old folk songs and classical guitar. Max curled against her side, snoring gently. "Do you ever miss the noise?" she asked. "Sometimes. But I think I used to confuse noise with comfort. Now, I think peace sounds different." The fire cracked, and we let the music drift around us. A few days later, a letter arrived for Abby. Sue had sent word through me that one came addressed to the cabin. It was from a publisher, a small one in Vermont that Abby had sent a few sample essays to before everything fell apart. She opened it on the porch with shaking hands. Max sat beside her like he understood the moment. I stood a little ways off, giving her space. She read it through once and then again. She didn't say anything at first, just let the paper fall into her lap. "They want me to send more," she said softly. "They liked my voice and said it felt honest." "That's because it is." Her eyes shone, not quite tears, but something close. "I think I can do this," she whispered. "You already are." That afternoon, we took a walk through the woods. Abby brought her camera, snapping shots of icicles, animal tracks, the way the light filtered through the pines. Max ran ahead, doubling back every so often like he was counting us. We found a clearing, one I hadn't seen before, where the snow lay undisturbed and blue in the shadow of the trees. Abby stood in the center, spinning slowly with her arms out. "I used to play here," she said. "We'd build forts out of sticks and pretend we lived in the trees. I haven't been here since I was 10. Feels like the kind of place that remembers." She looked around. "It does." We stayed until the sun dipped low, then returned to the cabin where the scent of rosemary and lentils filled the air. Abby had started making big batches of soup on Sundays, something her grandma used to do. We sat down to eat, Max curled under the table again. Outside, the snow began to fall. "I don't know where this all leads," she said quietly, "but I'm not scared of the next step anymore." I reached for my spoon. "That sounds like something worth writing about." She smiled and nodded. "It does, doesn't it?" And the quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was full of warmth and the sound of something new beginning. January settled in with a kind of hushed steadiness. Not the loud arrival of winter, but the deep, settled middle of it. The part where the snow doesn't melt between storms and everything outside moves just a little slower. The days were short, but full. Abby had taken to writing each morning at the little desk she'd placed beside the east-facing window, where the sun pushed through even on the grayest days. Max would lie across her feet, sighing contentedly every so often, a low rumble that reminded her he was there. I came by most mornings after finishing my own work. She usually greeted me with a warm drink and a handful of new ideas for her writing. Sometimes it was about the cabin, other times about the town or her grandfather, or Max. She read aloud from her notebook occasionally, voice soft, words carefully chosen. "It isn't always easy," she told me one morning, as we sat in the cabin with the fire warming our backs. "Some days I feel like the words are stuck behind a door I can't find the key to." "That just means you're saying something worth unlocking." She smiled, then turned back to her page. Max had started getting more vocal again, though not with the morning howls. Instead, he would let out a sharp bark now and then when he spotted deer through the trees, or a low grumble when he wanted Abby's attention. He seemed more alert these days, even energized. The weeks of waiting had worn something heavy into him, but now that weight seemed to be lifting. One afternoon, as we finished stacking a fresh load of firewood, Abby said, "I want to take him somewhere new, just a little trip." "Where were you thinking?" She hesitated. "That lake he used to swim in when I was a kid. The one with the dock. Think he'd remember it?" Only one way to find out. The next day, we loaded up the truck with blankets, a thermos of soup, and Max's leash. The lake sat 2 towns over, down a winding road lined with empty summer cabins and pine trees. It was half frozen now, a thick, glassy sheet at the center, with water lapping along the edges. The dock was still there, though its boards were soft with age. Max stepped carefully onto the frozen edge, sniffing, tail swaying slowly. Then he looked back at Abby, as if waiting for permission. She crouched and gave him a pat. "Go ahead, bud." And he did. He didn't run, but he walked the full length of the dock, turned, then came back, each step deliberate. Abby watched him, her eyes glassy. "He used to jump off the end," she said, over and over, like the water was his whole world. We sat on the tailgate, sharing soup and watching the lake reflect the clouds. "I didn't realize how much I missed it out here," Abby said. "There's something about wide open space that makes you feel small in a good way. Like the world still has room for you, even if you wandered off course." She nodded. "Exactly that." We stayed until the light started to shift, the trees casting long shadows across the snow. Max settled in the back seat with his head on Abby's lap for the drive home. Back at the cabin, Abby tacked a new photo above the fireplace. She'd taken it that day. Max mid-stride on the dock, ears perked, the lake behind him like a silver mirror. "He looks like he belongs there," I said. "He belongs anywhere he's loved," she replied. February came in with a sudden thaw, turning snowbanks to slush and uncovering patches of brittle grass. The air still bit at our noses, but the light stayed longer in the afternoons. The world was tilting again, ever so slightly. Abby had begun submitting more of her writing, small pieces to literary journals, essays to websites about healing and nature. Some were accepted, some weren't, but each submission made her walk a little taller. She shared one with me over breakfast one day, a story about the first time she came back to the cabin after her grandfather died. How it had felt empty and loud all at once. How Max had circled every room before finally sitting beside her, anchoring her in the silence. "You make it sound like poetry," I told her. It felt like poetry in a strange way, heartbreaking, but also full. She began planning community events with some of the folks in town, a seed swap at the library, a winter story circle at the diner. She said it felt good to make things with other people again. Max followed her everywhere, becoming something of a mascot for the effort. People smiled when they saw him, knelt to scratch behind his ears, asked about his favorite treats. One morning, Sue at the post office handed Abby a postcard addressed in careful handwriting. Abby turned it over and read it aloud to me. "Your story touched me. Thank you for reminding me to look for the quiet dogs in my own life." She turned the card over again. "No name. Just a return address in Idaho. That means someone out there found something in your words. I think that might be the best part of writing," she said, "when it helps someone else understand their own story." We walked home under a sky scattered with soft gray clouds. Max walked between us, sniffing at every patch of grass now exposed by the melting snow. The next project was the garden. Abby ordered seed catalogs and sketched layouts on the back of old envelopes. Raised beds, compost bins, places for climbing vines. Max liked to lie in the middle of the plot, watching her draw lines in the soil with a stick. "He's going to end up in every bed if I'm not careful," she laughed. "Guess we'll grow a Max tree. Might be the best thing that grows here." She was out there every day, even when the wind whipped sharp. Turning the earth. Preparing. Planning. One day, she called me over with excitement. "Look what came in the mail!" It was a packet of heirloom tomato seeds, the same kind her grandfather used to grow. He saved the seeds every year, said they were sweeter than any store tomato could dream of being. We made plans to build the beds that weekend, measured out boards, brought in soil, and dug out the frozen roots from the old garden patch. Max supervised from a sunny spot near the shed. That evening, we sat by the fire, fingers sore and arms tired in a good way. "I never thought I'd care about something like this again," Abby said, "but now I can't wait. That's what starting over feels like. Not just new, but wanted." Max rested his chin on her knee. "You brought me back to myself," she said quietly, brushing her hand through his fur. March crept in with a golden kind of chill. The first snowdrops bloomed beside the porch. The creek, long silent under ice, began to babble again. One night, I found Abby standing in the doorway of the cabin, staring out into the trees. "I used to think I heard things in the dark," she said. "But maybe I was just waiting to hear something that mattered." We stood there for a long time, saying nothing. In the morning, I brought over a bag of wildflower seed. We spread them behind the cabin where the sunlight lingered longest. Max danced through the dirt, leaving little paw prints between our steps. "We're going to need a fence," Abby said, "or he'll end up digging it all back up. Or maybe he just wants to leave his mark." She laughed. "I think he already has." That day, she wrote for hours. When I left, she hugged me tightly, her voice soft as she said, "I never told you thank you." "Not really. You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did." And as I walked down the path, I could still hear her laughter echoing behind me. Not loud, not forced, just full of something real, the kind of sound that makes even the woods feel warmer. April arrived like a whisper. The snow melted from the ridgelines first, leaving the valleys soaked and soft. Each day the world grew louder with the sounds of return, birdsong, thawed creeks, the distant hum of early insects waking beneath the bark. It was the kind of season that didn't announce itself all at once, but rather slowly, as if asking permission to begin again. At the cabin, Abby had taken to walking the woods behind the property with a canvas bag and a notebook. She'd come back with twigs, feathers, bits of moss, and phrases she murmured as she wrote them down. Max followed her closely, nose pressed to the ground, tail wagging at every new smell. "I'm working on a piece about patterns," she told me one morning, as I handed her a fresh loaf of bread I'd picked up from the bakery in town. How the world repeats itself, even when we're too busy to notice. Like Max lying on the same spot of the porch every morning. Exactly. Or the way the creek carves the same curve through the woods each year, even when it floods. The garden beds we built were finally ready. She planted the tomatoes on a chilly Saturday, hands buried wrist-deep in the soil. I helped her space the rows, and Max, despite our best efforts, still managed to dig up one corner before we could redirect him with a chew toy. "He thinks he's part of the planting," Abby said, laughing. "Maybe he is." That afternoon, we built a small fence around the beds, nothing fancy. Just enough to keep paws out and vegetables in. Abby painted the slats white and hung a small wind chime made from old spoons and bits of twine. When the breeze blew through, it made a sound like distant bells. The town began to stir again, too. Neighbors emerged from winter like flowers, waving from porches and gathering on sidewalks. Abby joined a writing circle at the library that met every other Tuesday. She was nervous at first, unsure if her words would sound right when spoken aloud. But when she read her first piece about the silence of deep snow and the weight of being watched over by a loyal dog, the room went still. Afterwards, 2 people came up to her and asked if she would share more. "I didn't expect anyone to care," she told me that night. "But they did. You gave them something to feel." Max had begun to learn new routines. He waited at the door when she left, paced once or twice, then curled in his spot by the window until she returned. When she got back, he danced in a full circle, as if celebrating not just her arrival, but the idea that she always came back now. The following week, we found ourselves working together more often. I had tools and time, and Abby had ideas. She wanted to build a bench under the birch trees near the creek. A place to sit and write, she said. A place to think. We scavenged wood from the old barn down the road and carried it back one beam at a time. Max trotted between us with a small stick in his mouth, determined to contribute. "Think he'd fetch a hammer if we asked?" I joked as I drove a nail into the frame. "Only if we smeared it in peanut butter first." The bench took 2 days to build, stained and sealed and placed beneath the wide stretch of branches that had just begun to bud. Abby brought a cushion and a throw blanket, and by the 3rd morning, she was sitting there before the sun was even fully up, pencil in hand, Max resting in the grass beside her. It was during one of these mornings that she asked me something different. "Do you ever think about leaving?" "Leaving the cabin?" "No, I mean this place, the town, everything. Starting over somewhere completely new." I looked toward the woods, the familiar paths, the ridge in the distance. "I used to," I said. "When things got quiet in a bad way. But now, not really. Quiet feels different now, like something that holds you instead of pressing you down." "I feel that too," she said. "But part of me still wonders if staying is brave or just safe. Maybe it's both. Maybe staying after everything is its own kind of courage." We watched Max roll in the dirt, tail wagging, ears twitching in a patch of sunlight. "He never doubted this place, Shumfong," she said. "He just waited for me to see it again." As the days lengthened, we began fixing the outer shed. Abby wanted it to be a real space for workshops, writing, crafts, maybe even community events. We strung up lights, swept out cobwebs, and built new shelves from salvaged planks. She painted the door a soft sunflower yellow. "Every time I touch a brush or move a nail, I feel like I'm laying down something permanent," she said. "Like I'm saying, I'm not running anymore. You haven't been for a while now." Spring moved with a quiet rhythm. The wind was warmer, the evenings longer. Fireflies began to flicker again. We spent time on the porch most nights, sharing small stories and watching the sky shift through shades of lavender and gold. One evening, as Max chased a moth through the yard, Abby turned to me and said, "I think I want to write about the in-between." "What do you mean?" "Not the beginning, not the end, just the middle. The part where you're rebuilding but not quite done. The part no one talks about because it's not dramatic enough, but it's where life actually happens." "That sounds like something a lot of people need to hear." She nodded. "Then maybe it's what I need to write." Her journal filled quickly after that. Pages of half-formed paragraphs, sketches of Max, notes about conversations we'd had. She started keeping a list titled, "Things I Want to Remember When It Gets Quiet Again." I glanced at it once. The entries were simple. Max's snore through the open door, the sound of wind chimes after rain, the way a seed packet feels before it's opened. She added to it every day. One afternoon, we hiked back to the ridge. The path was dry now, moss-covered and speckled with sun. We brought sandwiches, a flask of lemon tea, and Max's favorite rope toy. At the top, we sat in our usual spot, looking out over the valley. "I used to think this view was only for people who had their life together," Abby said. "But now I think it's here for anyone who climbs. It doesn't ask what you carry, just that you make it." She took a deep breath and smiled. "Well, we made it." Max dropped the rope toy at her feet and barked once. Abby tossed it, and he bounded after it with more energy than I'd seen in weeks. We stayed until the sun began its descent, the horizon awash in a soft coral glow. "I don't know what tomorrow holds," she said as we packed up, but today felt like the right kind of quiet. And in that silence, there was no more howling, just the steady rhythm of footsteps heading home. The first morning of May brought rain. Not a storm, but a soft, steady drizzle that coated the trees in silver and sent rivulets down the cabin windows. The ground, damp from days of thaw and bloom, drank it in with quiet gratitude. I arrived just after dawn, boots already caked with mud from the trail. Max met me at the edge of the garden fence, his fur speckled with dew, tail wagging as he trotted beside me to the porch. Abby was inside, barefoot, stirring something on the stove. She looked up when I entered, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Warm oats and honey," she said. It felt like the right kind of morning for it. We ate at the small table by the window, watching the mist drift through the trees. The world outside was green now, new and full. The tomato plants in the garden were beginning to stretch upward, leaves glossy and bold. Abby had added a row of marigolds between them, bright little bursts of orange and yellow that danced with the breeze. Max lay near the door, his head resting on his paws, ears twitching at every distant sound. He'd grown calmer, more watchful, not out of fear or longing, but as if he knew this place was safe and simply wanted to keep it that way. After breakfast, Abby pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. She placed it on the table in front of me. "What's this?" "You'll see." Inside were copies of her first printed essay collection, freshly published by the small press in Vermont. The title on the front read, "In the Quiet Between." On the cover was a black and white photo of the cabin from the creek's edge, fog rising behind it. I opened to the first page and read the dedication. For Max, who waited, and for those who learned to listen. My throat tightened. I looked up at her, and she smiled. "They sent me 20 copies. I already gave one to Sue. Thought you might want one too. I'll keep it by my bed." We spent the rest of the morning sorting mail and organizing her desk, which had become crowded with notebooks, letters from readers, and clippings from local papers that had begun to take notice. Her name appeared in a regional journal the week before, alongside a short interview where she talked about healing and hope. "You know," she said as we cleaned, "I used to think I needed to disappear to find myself, but it turns out I needed to return." She pulled an envelope from under a stack of papers and handed it to me. "I sent a copy to my dad," she said. "He called last night. Said he read every page. Twice. That's good. He wants to visit. See the cabin again. Meet Max. He should." We sat on the porch as the rain eased, steam lifting from the warm wood beneath our feet. Max lay between us, his breath slow and steady. Abby turned toward me, her eyes soft. "I think I'm ready to stop counting how many days it's been since everything changed. I want to start counting forward now." "That sounds like something worth writing about." She nodded, and we watched as a robin landed near the edge of the garden, hopping through puddles. The next few weeks moved with an ease that felt earned. The writing classes at the library turned into small community gatherings. Abby started hosting weekend mornings in the cabin's shed workshop, where people came to share stories or sit in silence and write together. Max took it all in stride, laying near the doorway or curling beside guests who needed quiet comfort. In town, people waved when we passed. Abby stopped to talk, her voice steady now, no longer searching. She had found her place, not by chasing something new, but by planting roots in what was already hers. One morning, we hiked up to the ridge again, the same place we'd visited months before. The trees were thick with leaves now, and the ground cushioned with moss and petals. We brought sandwiches and lemonade, Max trotting ahead, leading the way like he knew every bend. At the top, we sat in our spot, looking out across the valley. "I used to come up here when I didn't know what I wanted," she said. "Now I come up here just to be." We didn't say much else. There wasn't a need. On the way back down, Max slowed a bit, his steps more careful, more deliberate. Abby noticed, her brow furrowing. "He's getting older," she said. "He's earned it." That evening, she gave him a warm bath by the fireplace, drying him with soft towels and whispering to him as she brushed through his coat. "You brought me back," she said to him. "You did more than wait. You held this place together until I could see it again." Max leaned into her hand, eyes closed. Summer arrived slowly, with long daylight hours and the hum of crickets in the evenings. The tomatoes ripened, and the marigolds bloomed bright against the soil. Abby canned jars of sauce and gifted them to neighbors. She painted signs for the garden beds and added a bench near the back fence, where the sun fell longest in the afternoon. One morning we walked into town together for the summer fair. Abby wore a straw hat and carried a basket of wildflowers. Max walked beside us, his pace slow but steady. Children ran up to pet him, and he sat still, soaking in the attention like sunlight. At the fair, she gave a short reading beneath a striped tent, her voice clear and calm. The crowd listened closely, and when she finished, they applauded. Not with loud cheers, but with the kind of quiet appreciation that means something deeper. On the way home, she looked at me, her eyes glowing. "I used to think I didn't matter in this town, but now it feels like I'm part of its story. You always were. You just needed time to remember." In the months that followed, the quiet settled differently. It wasn't empty. It was full of life. The clink of a teacup in the morning, the scratch of pen on paper, the soft sigh of Max curling up by the fire, the creak of the porch swing in the breeze. One morning, Abby stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the woods. "He didn't howl today," she said. "He hasn't in a long time. That means he knows I'm not leaving." She stepped down and walked through the garden, brushing her fingers across the tomato vines. Max followed slowly, then lay down near the marigolds. I watched them from the steps, the morning sun spilling across the yard, the trees swaying gently in the distance. There had been so many days when the silence hurt, when it felt like absence. But not now. Not anymore. Now the quiet carried memories. It carried belonging. And it carried the sound of a dog, no longer calling out, but simply resting, watching. Home. That was the sound of everything coming full circle. Not with noise, but with peace,